I will most definitely not be moving back to the country to live with my partner since I am pregnant. Nor will I reside in a two-family house. Whatever happens, I'm not leaving this location. My brother-in-law and his wife ended up squatting in my house, which is strange. They were meant to reside with my in-laws, but they invaded my home instead of living in a two-family house to avoid doing housework. I find it inconceivable that such an absurd request gets granted. Do they consider me insignificant? Sarah is my name. I'm a 28-year-old housewife who works. I married Aaron 3 years ago, and we are soon to become parents. We live in a big house, so having several kids would be great. My parents constructed this house for their retirement, but they passed away before they had a chance to utilize it. They left it to me. My spouse received a call on his cell phone one day from his distant parents. What? Something burning at the house? All right, I'll go there immediately, he responded. My spouse looked pale as he narrated the scenario after hanging up the phone. It appeared as though a fire started in the middle of the night. Luckily, his parents made it out unharmed, but the house was unfit for human habitation. Could they stay here for a time, considering the circumstances? Awkwardly, my spouse offered this, seeing how I would respond. Here, how could I refuse? My in-laws and I didn't get along, although we did get together twice a year. Having to accept my husband's humility was my only option. Let's carry that out. Let's hurry to pick them up. My spouse responded, "Thank you, Sarah," as he got up and got ready to head out in the car. My in-laws' place is 2 hours' drive away. I remarked, "Be careful when driving at night," and I got out of the car. The following day, it was nearly noon when my husband got home. It was really difficult, he said, looking weary. The fire had been put out by the time he got to my in-laws' house, but a large number of police and fire personnel remained on the scene. Instead of leaving the paperwork to his bewildered in-laws, my husband had to handle it. He promptly examined the damage and obtained details on the upcoming steps. A short circuit was the source of the fire. There were several credentials required, and my spouse appeared perplexed as he sorted them. Attending the scene investigation, confirming the damage, calculating the cost for waste disposal. Is he okay? As I watched him groan like a zombie, I thought. My spouse's similarly fatigued parents stood behind him. They had ash all over their faces and were too tired to show any emotion. "Sarah, I apologize." With a sardonic smile, my mother-in-law added, "We really troubled you." But then, maybe from astonishment, tears welled up. My father-in-law sat next to her and gently whispered, "I'm sorry." My spouse claims that the house nearly burned down to the ground. Their cherished house, rich with memories, was gone. It's difficult to get over the shock. Don't worry, family is there to support each other. I took time off work to be ready for their arrival, just like my spouse did. This is the history of our shared living arrangement. My in-laws, however, wanted to rebuild their home at its original site when the insurance settlement was resolved, so they did not plan to stay here for very long. About to retire, my father-in-law intended to spend some time working at a nearby branch. My mother-in-law was a wonderful assistance since she kept the house neat and was adept at domestic activities due to her many years as a housewife. A tidy home is cozy. Arriving home to a warm lunch made me happy. This shared living thing, I thought, would work out. But something unexpected happened. One day, Kevin, my husband's brother, and his wife all of a sudden showed up and declared, "We will live here." This home belonged to me, and I had not given my assent. Still, their possessions were being brought in on a regular basis. "Why would you live here?" My brother-in-law disregarded my question and kept giving the movers directions. After realizing that there was no use in talking to his brother, my husband was checking in with his parents. It appears that my in-laws were initially planning for my brother-in-law and his spouse to reside with them. If you haven't lived together yet, please stay where you have up until now until the house is built, my husband said. However, my brother-in-law gave an explanation, claiming that we were kicked out of the apartment. My spouse inquired, "What happened?" The business filed for bankruptcy, and I was laid off. My brother-in-law said, "I was unable to pay the rent during that time, therefore we were evicted." My husband said sharply, "Did you actually look for a job?" My brother-in-law simply smiled wryly. He responded, "Of course, but the economy is bad." All of their possessions had been moved inside the home in the interim. It was remarkable how much stuff they owned, given that they had been living in an apartment. "I'm worn out." The final individual to come commented, "Moving is really tough while pregnant," as they entered the home. "Hello, Mandy. It's really been a long time." "Hello. It seems it's going to be tough from now on." Mandy, my brother-in-law's wife, cheerfully smiled at me. She was pregnant for the first time. I couldn't believe my brother-in-law was unemployed while having a pregnant wife. Their appearance, kicked out of the apartment, did not seem desperate or tense at all. It seemed they had decided to rely on us. My insight was soon proven correct. My brother-in-law and his wife, who suddenly appeared and dominated our house, did absolutely nothing. "Aren't you looking for a new job?" "Even if I find a job here, we'll have to move back once the house is rebuilt." "Searching for a job here is pointless," he said. "How long will the rebuilding take?" I wished he would at least find some job, but my husband, being the younger brother, found it hard to speak up to his elder brother. I was able to tolerate the pregnant sister-in-law doing nothing, but it was annoying to be constantly ordered around. I've heard that if the pregnancy is going well, one should be able to do a bit of work, but I'm not sure since I have no experience. Sighing, my mother-in-law and I handled all the work. However, what I couldn't stand was when my things were used without permission. "Mandy, do you know where I put my beauty serum?" "Oh, I used up mine, so I borrowed it. I like it because it makes my skin so supple." That beauty serum was my favorite and expensive. "I'm going to be late for work. Where's my cell phone? Mandy, why are you using it without asking? Give it back." "I'm just talking to a friend. Let me use it." "But I'm in a hurry now." "You're noisy. I want to use the internet today, so just let me use the cell phone. Give it back." Such things also happened. As a result, my mother-in-law bought a new cell phone for my sister-in-law, and I finally got my phone back. My brother-in-law lazed around without working, and his wife continued to use my things without permission. They were truly a nuisance. If it weren't for my usually reserved in-laws, I would definitely be angry. However, my mother-in-law seemed quite exhausted. During the times my husband, father-in-law, and I were at work, she was left alone to take care of my brother-in-law and his wife. She was experiencing both physical fatigue and mental stress. The stress continued, but finally, the insurance money came through, and the reconstruction of their house began to materialize. There was a prospect of them moving out, and I felt a bit relieved. Then, one day, something happened. "Take a look at this. It's the floor plan of the new house," said my father-in-law during a weekend, showing us the blueprints from a meeting with the contractor. It's a full 2-family house with 2 separate entrances designed to ensure privacy. This way, even if my sister-in-law is lazy, my mother-in-law won't have to do all the housework alone. "That's wonderful," I said. "Isn't it?" replied my mother-in-law with a smile. But then, a problem occurred. "Why are there 2 kitchens?" asked my sister-in-law. "Does this mean separate utility bills too?" said my brother-in-law. "That's normal," responded my father-in-law. My sister-in-law immediately exclaimed, "I hate this." "What do you hate?" the puzzled father-in-law asked. "Because this way, there's no point in living together. There's no need for a two-family house. One kitchen is enough. After all, mother-in-law will do the cooking, my sister-in-law argued. Huh, but in the future, won't you be the one cooking if you have children? I said. No, what are you talking about? She reacted as if I was wrong. I'll be busy with childcare. My mother-in-law should do all the cleaning, laundry, and cooking, she insisted. To this, my surprised mother-in-law looked utterly shocked. Mandy, I can support within my capacity, but I can't take on everything. You're a full-time housewife, right? Help out a bit. It seemed that my sister-in-law, who was trying to push all household responsibilities onto my mother-in-law, was opposed to the idea of a two-family house. Then she declared, Enough! I'd rather stay in this house than move to such a place. Huh, that would be troublesome. What's so troublesome about it? Moving is impossible now, especially to such a countryside, she replied. My brother-in-law joined in. Exactly. It's impossible to work in such a countryside, expressing his anger. Their words were so out of place, I didn't know where to begin. Why don't you find a job quickly and move out? My husband suggested. And who will do the housework if I do that? He retorted. My husband, in-laws, and I were just fed up with their comments when my sister-in-law dropped a decisive statement. Since I am pregnant, I absolutely will not move back to the countryside to live together. I won't live in a two-family house either. No matter what happens, I will not move from this place, she declared. Her words were truly unacceptable. Family discussions continued over several days, but it seemed that my sister-in-law had no intention of leaving this house. Moreover, the space they occupied gradually expanded. One day, when I returned from work, I found my mother-in-law distressed at the entrance. What happened? Sarah, you're back. Kevin and Mandy started changing rooms on their own. I tried to stop them, but they were too forceful. When I checked inside the house, our spacious bedroom had been taken over by my brother-in-law and his wife. Where are our things? I asked. My brother-in-law pointed to another room, saying, I moved everything except the bed to that room. That room was the smallest in the house, and items from our previous bedroom were scattered about. What a mess! I wanted to consult with my husband immediately, but he was away on a business trip and wouldn't be home for another week. I avoided calling and sent a message, but he hadn't seen it yet. I felt anxious. The next day, the situation worsened and debt collectors visited. Sarah, it's terrible. My mother-in-law called me at work, and I hurried home. When I got home, I found her crouching at the entrance. Apparently, some menacing-looking people had come looking for Kevin. However, Kevin, who usually did nothing all day, was the first to immediately run away. My sister-in-law was also absent. My mother-in-law had to deal with them alone and was quite shaken. Seeing my tearful mother-in-law, I made up my mind. I couldn't endure it any longer. I would tell everything to my husband. I couldn't just stay silent. Even though he was on a business trip, it was impossible for my mother-in-law to endure anymore, and I was at my limit as well. Our relationship as a couple might be strained, but I didn't care. This house was built by my beloved parents, and I could not tolerate any further insults. I decided to call my husband. Hello, Sarah. What happened? My husband asked. Who do you choose, me or your brother? I asked. What? My husband exclaimed. As I explained the situation regarding my brother-in-law and his wife, I could hear his astonishment over the phone. With a deep sigh, my husband said, All right, Sarah, do as you like. What did you say? Sorry, Sarah. I've trampled over your feelings. It's my responsibility. You can handle my brother and his wife as you please, my husband replied. Really? Of course, because you are the most important. Hearing this from my husband, I felt a renewed attraction to him. Understood. I'll do as I please. With my husband's consent that night, I immediately took action. As usual, my brother-in-law and his wife were relaxing in our room. They casually walked into the kitchen, with my brother-in-law announcing, "I'm hungry." "Tonight's meal is special," I said, preparing to serve dinner. "What is this? The surprise?" my sister-in-law asked. "These are boiled green vegetables, spinach and broccoli, perfect for pregnant women. Please enjoy," I responded, offering her the plate. "Huh? But is this all?" my sister-in-law asked, puzzled. "Just eat," I insisted, as Ed gently but firmly encouraged her to begin eating. "What else is there?" my brother-in-law asked, eyeing the meal suspiciously. "Here, this is a pile of beans," I said, placing a bowl in front of him. "What is this?" my brother-in-law exclaimed in disbelief. "Beans are cheap but rich in nutrients." "Impressive, right?" I explained with a smile. "But this isn't enough," he complained. "Just eat," I repeated, forcing him to follow suit, just like his wife. After dinner, tensions escalated. "What the hell? This kind of treatment of a pregnant woman is unacceptable." Screams erupted from my sister-in-law. I ignored the commotion and silently headed to the room they had been using. Without a word, I made a phone call. "Can you start right away?" I asked. Within minutes, a worker dressed in work clothes appeared and began dismantling the bed. "What are you doing? That bed was high quality. It was so comfortable," my sister-in-law shouted, confused. "It's dangerous for a pregnant woman to fall off the bed. I'm reluctantly giving it up for your wife's safety." "Please sleep on this floor mattress instead," I explained. "Huh? What are you talking about?" my brother-in-law asked, baffled. Since their old mattresses were no longer needed, I had those disposed of as well. "It's late tonight, so I'll lend you this blanket. But as adults, you should prepare your own bedding," I said firmly, handing them a small square object and walking out. "This is a lap blanket!" my sister-in-law screamed, her voice filled with frustration. I ignored her protests. They complained to us and our parents, but we locked ourselves in our room, blocking out any further confrontation. I wasn't aware of what happened afterward, but eventually, they spent the night on the sofa in the living room. In the morning, when I went to the living room, I could feel their sharp stares, but I paid them no mind. I prepared breakfast and served it to my brother-in-law and his wife. "What is this? Boiled potatoes? Where is the bread?" my sister-in-law asked, incredulous. "It seems like some people can't see the bread," I muttered under my breath. "What are you saying? It's clearly not there," she argued, reaching for something. When she reached out her hand, I immediately slapped it away. "Do you really think such behavior is appropriate for a pregnant woman?" I asked sternly. "This is abuse," she cried out. "How can you call it abuse when food is being served?" I calmly replied. At that, my sister-in-law fell silent, seemingly bewildered by my response. But I didn't want to trouble a pregnant woman any further, so I said, "I'll leave it to my mother-in-law." My brother-in-law, on the other hand, walked away without a word. He was probably angry and went off to gamble. Not that it mattered. I had already taken the money from his wallet. "I haven't stolen it, I just took it back," I reassured myself. Later, I noticed my brother-in-law acting suspicious. After observing for a few days, I realized he had been hiding something. Pretending to take a bath while keeping watch, I quickly caught the evidence of his theft. "Where is my money? Give it back," my brother-in-law shouted as he burst into the room. Screaming, "Oh, you're back then. Please handle the guest I left." The handling of the visitor fell to my brother-in-law. Ha! At that single word, my brother-in-law was at a loss for words. "Sorry for the trouble. Please leave the rest to me." Facing my brother-in-law were people with menacing looks. "We need to talk about the money you owe. Come to the office." Ah, just like in a movie. In front of such a peculiar sensation, my brother-in-law, with tears in his eyes, was led away. By the way, everything was prepared in advance. Of course, both my in-laws and sister-in-law agreed, as long as it wouldn't cause them any trouble. Now on to the final stage. Mandy, you are a stranger, and I have no obligation to keep you here anymore. What did you say? My sister-in-law was shocked by my statement. I quickly presented her with documents. It seems you've been using my phone without permission, sending calls and emails. The records are here. That child, he's not my brother-in-law's, is he? Ha! What my in-laws exclaimed. It turns out my sister-in-law had been dating another man before she married, and he seemed to be the father of the child. The remaining emails included messages like, "Once the baby is born, let's go out together as a family of 3. Leaving such evidence was truly foolish. Once my brother-in-law returns, you will probably get a divorce. But before that, please leave this place." At those words, my sister-in-law's complexion faded. What are you saying? You're going to kick out a pregnant woman? You all are terrible. No, the problem lies with you. I've already contacted your parents. Huh, you're sending me back home? I don't want to go back home. It's too rural there. Maybe living here is still better. Please, Father, let us live in your house. I have no problem with a 2-family home. Well, the plan for the 2-family home has been canceled. My sister-in-law's face went pale at my father-in-law's declaration. What did you say? We're planning to clear this site and sell the land. Then we intend to move to an apartment. Why is this happening? My sister-in-law crumbled, as if she had lost all her options. At that moment, the intercom rang. It seems your parents have arrived from your hometown. Really? Seeing her real parents in front of her, my sister-in-law's face turned as white as if she were a ghost. She was quickly taken back to her hometown, returned to her very strict parents. She became completely disheartened. Her parents demanded compensation from my brother-in-law, but he did not return. Although my in-laws seemed a bit sad, they accepted their son's actions as his own responsibility, since he was an independent adult. Afterward, they bought a new apartment and moved there. As a result, we were able to regain our peaceful days. Once the stress was gone, I soon became pregnant. My husband cried with joy, and my in-laws were very pleased. We repaired the house and prepared to welcome our new family member. Mom, Dad, please watch over us, I said as I looked around the house and gently stroked my pregnant belly. We are going to live in this house as a family. You should be grateful, you know, my mother-in-law said, looking down at me with a gentle smile. How rude she is, I thought. She said that despite the fact that my mother had passed away from illness not long ago. It was certainly unpleasant to hear my mother-in-law, with whom I had no connection, cheerfully talk about renovating the house. She came suddenly, even though the funeral hadn't taken place yet, without offering a single word of condolence. Instead, there she was, talking happily about living with her son, ignoring me as I was consumed by tears. It seems to her that the family only includes her son, and I am like an outsider. She waved her hand at me as if she was shooing away a pest. I'm saying we'll live as a family. Did you think a daughter-in-law with no blood relation would be treated as family? My name is Tracy, and I'm 30 years old. I have an older brother I respect who is 5 years older than me. We've always been very close, and he has always been there to help me with anything. When I was having trouble with friends in elementary school, he would go directly to them and ask them to be kind to me for my sake. He might be a bit overprotective, but he's a reliable brother who cares deeply for his sister. During my rebellious phase in middle and high school, he often confronted our parents strongly, but he always treated me warmly. He was always there to support me when I was in trouble, a person I could rely on. Don't worry about what others think. I support you, Tracy, he would say. I used to be envious of his attitude. He also said this when our father passed away from cancer during my university years. I was truly grateful to my teachers and parents. They were the ones who always thought of me and scolded me. As he reflected on his past, it was surprising to hear from my once mischievous brother. It was rare to hear him talk about the past, and it made me want to become a respected figure like his teachers and our parents. This experience nurtured in me a desire to support children in their growth and those facing difficulties, leading me to choose a career in teaching. While everyone around me was busy job hunting, I focused solely on preparing for the teacher recruitment exams. I still remember the surprised look on my brother's face when I passed the exam and told him and our mother, "Congratulations. I never thought you would become a teacher, Tracy. Good luck," he said, supporting me despite landing my dream job in teaching. Reality was not as sweet as I had expected. I was busy every day with lesson preparations and student guidance, with late work becoming the norm. As remote work became more widespread, those in the teaching profession had no such option, forcing me to commute on crowded trains every morning. Weekends and holidays often required attendance for club activities. Additionally, living independently and managing a household as an adult made me acutely aware of the difficulties of domestic tasks. I remember struggling both physically and mentally in my first year as a working adult. Yet, I felt fulfilled in my role as an educator. As I became more accustomed to my teaching life, I started noticing odd behaviors and words from my mother. Conversations over the phone became difficult, and she would quickly forget things we had just talked about. Concerned, I visited my family home and was shocked to see garbage scattered everywhere. My normally tidy mother was confused about why things had gotten to that point, saying she had forgotten to take out the trash or that she had already cleaned up. Sharing the situation with my brother, we decided to go to the hospital together, where the diagnosis was unexpected. Our mother was diagnosed with dementia. Though it was early-stage mild cognitive impairment, her communication with other people had decreased since our father's passing, and her condition had gradually become more apparent. This situation increased my interactions with my brother and naturally led to more frequent visits to our family home. During these visits, my brother and I often discussed the future. Amid my busy life, a friend introduced me to Steve when I was too overwhelmed with work and household management to find any personal enjoyment. My friend, insisting I needed time to relax, invited me out for drinks, where I met Steve. He worked for a foreign company and was deeply interested in the international aspect of my job as a French teacher. He was sincere and always prioritized me. The time spent with Steve was a happy moment in my busy days. Just having a meal together for a short while made all the fatigue disappear. I was drawn to him, and after dating for 2 years, on a day that wasn't special, he reserved a private room in a restaurant in New York City for us. Unexpectedly, he gave me a ring and proposed, saying, "I want to make you happy, Tracy. I want to marry you." But I couldn't answer right away. The reason was the anticipation and burden of caring for my mother as her condition worsened. Steve was aware of my mother's situation, but I hesitated to involve him in this issue. Nonetheless, he encouraged me, saying, "If you're worried about your mother's situation, don't be. I want to support her together with you." I remember barely being able to say yes through my tears when I decided to marry Steve at 27. We discussed it in advance and consulted with my brother about my mother's future. As a result, we decided to build a duplex house where we could live together with my mother, using our marriage as the opportunity. From then on, I started receiving more frequent contacts from my mother-in-law. Before the marriage, my interaction with her was limited to greetings and face-to-face meetings. Initially, I felt her interest was minimal, but I sensed a reason behind her frequent recent contacts. Eventually, it became clear that the main content of these contacts was about the new house we plan to build. "I heard you're building a new house. What's the floor plan like? I'm curious about my son's new home. Can I see it?" As soon as we started talking, She made countless suggestions about the house's design, such as, the kitchen would be better if it were larger. The staircase would be more suitable here, not there. Why not make the room next to the living room a guest room? Floor heating is a must since this area gets quite cold in the winter. I was uncomfortable with my mother-in-law, who wasn't going to live with us, meddling. But Steve stepped in to mediate to avoid conflict. Despite this, my mother-in-law persistently contacted me directly. Suspecting some ulterior motive, I discussed it with Steve. Your mother's behavior feels like she plans to live there herself. I'm worried she might be plotting something. Even if you talk to her, she contacts me directly, and I don't know how to respond. Yeah, there must be some reason for that. Don't worry, I'll handle it. From now on, you can ignore all contacts from my mom. But won't she feel bad about that? It's fine. She's acting out of line. I'll talk to her. However, given her nature, she might try to contact you again. In that case, it's okay to avoid her call and ignore it. With Steve's support, I avoided further contact with my mother-in-law. The house design was finalized, and construction on the new home began. We planned to move into the new house in 6 months, and packing was going smoothly when the contacts with my mother-in-law had almost ceased. Steve informed his mother of the completion date of the new house, but she didn't seem to react much. Half a year passed, and the new house was completed. The first floor was arranged with a living room, kitchen, and a spacious room for my mother, while the second floor was arable space with individual rooms. However, by the time the new house was completed, my mother's health had begun to decline. During the day, when we were at work, my mother spent a lot of time alone, and I often came home to find the house in disarray. The doctor had warned that limiting her activities could lead to a rapid progression of her symptoms, so we had her do small tasks during the day. Yet, actions that had been easy for her became increasingly difficult. While she retained her cooking ability, she often left pans on the stove after use. She would forget to add detergent when using the washing machine or add too much, resulting in excessive foam. Despite having the newspaper right beside her, she would complain that the newspaper didn't come today until the evening. The challenges posed by my mother's condition were countless, and my brother and I decided to use daycare services during the day. At first, my mother was confused by the unfamiliar environment, but having companions during the day gradually made her smile more. When she came home, she would talk about making paper crafts or participating in events at the children's center. My mother gradually adapted to this new routine, and her condition seemed to temporarily stabilize. But it didn't last long. Just 2 years later, my mother seemed to have caught an off-season cold, but ultimately, she passed away from pneumonia. Just maintaining daily life seemed to deplete her strength, and she couldn't eat properly due to a lack of appetite, leading to a weakened immune system. I couldn't stop crying and couldn't recover from the sudden event. Yet administrative tasks, such as contacting the city hall, notifying relatives, and arranging funeral services, piled up and waited for no one. As I began to prepare for the funeral, my mother-in-law arrived with a lot of luggage. Seeing her ready to stay over, I was grateful she came to help with the funeral preparations and welcomed her, saying, "Thank you so much for coming during this busy time. Please come in." However, as soon as she stepped inside, she made an unexpected statement. "I will live in this house." Surprised and at a loss for words, I couldn't make a rebuttal when she said, "If you don't like it, you can leave. Steve and I will live here." She said that without a word of condolence. I was utterly confused by her sudden self-centered declaration. Ignoring my bewilderment, my mother-in-law continued, "I've waited 2 years, and finally, I can live here. How about it? Is the floor plan to my liking?" As she began to walk around the house, at that moment I understood why she had been contacting us so frequently before. Perhaps she had always intended to move into the home we built. She tried to change the floor plan to her liking, and believed that I should receive her instructions rather than Steve, which might explain her persistent contacts. She seemed to have rushed over after hearing about my mother's death from Steve. That's when the shock hit me. Steve, didn't you know the owner of this house isn't me? It was Tracy's mother. What? Moreover, when Tracy's mother passed away, the heir would be Tracy's brother. What does that mean? My mother-in-law, glaring at me, said, "The homeowner should be the husband. Steve earns more, and your salary couldn't possibly cover the mortgage. You must be relying entirely on Steve's earnings. This house might as well be Steve's." Really? What an incomprehensible daughter-in-law and her family. What do you think, Steve? Steve tried to explain. No, Mom, listen. It's okay. Steve let me explain. I interjected. My mother-in-law turned her sharp gaze from Steve to me and challenged, "What are you trying to say?" "The mortgage is being paid by my brother and me. I cover the payments with my income, and I have never taken money from Steve." Is that true, Steve? Yes, it's true, I continued. When we built this house, we decided it would eventually go to my brother. Now that my mother has passed away, the home will be for my brother, his wife, and her parents to live in. I explained. Carly, my mother-in-law, was stunned and speechless, but unable to accept the arrangement. I can't accept that. After living with and caring for your parents, it's natural that it would be my turn next. I've been waiting for this day. This is too unreasonable. You know I have a lawyer acquaintance. I'll talk to him and proceed with renouncing the inheritance. Of course, we had no intention of doing so, but my mother-in-law was clearly agitated. My brother will be arriving soon, so let's discuss this again when he's here. I will express my opinion directly to your brother and ask for his renunciation. I'm the type to speak my mind, so my position won't change even when your brother arrives. After the statement, my mother-in-law waited in the living room until my brother arrived. Steve, while confused, repeatedly apologized to me. Don't worry. It seems she won't be convinced by just my word, so let's talk again with my mother when my brother arrives. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was on the phone with a lawyer, discussing the renunciation of the inheritance. Yes, I believe the person in question will agree. Yes, please prepare the necessary documents if there's progress. About an hour later, the sound of parking outside was heard. My brother has arrived, I called out. She stood up eagerly, saying, I will have this house transferred to Steve, then I can live here, and proceeded to the living room. At that moment, the living room door opened, and my brother appeared. My mother-in-law, about to shout something, took a deep breath and opened her mouth wide. But as she opened her mouth, no sound came out, and she looked surprised, losing her strength and sitting down heavily. In fact, my brother's appearance could be mistaken for someone from the underworld due to his quite intimidating look. His hobby is surfing. Furthermore, as he works outdoors throughout the year, his skin is sunburned, and the sun damage has made his hair brittle. As a result, finding hair maintenance troublesome, he chose to have a shaved head. He is tall and has a muscular and sturdy physique. Especially noticeable is an old scar on his forehead, the result of a fall during his elementary school years. Combined with his appearance, many people mistake it for a scar from a blade. Seeing such a brother in person, my mother-in-law seemed to lose her will and slump down to sit. Do you have anything you would like to say about this house? My brother coldly asked my mother-in-law. No. I had thought I would live here after your mother passed away, but then I heard that you would be living here, and I realized I understood nothing. Did Tracy tell you to live here? We had a thorough discussion about this house before it was built, so I believe there was no such conversation. He spoke in a firm tone. No, I misunderstood. Because I was involved in planning the layout with Tracy before the house was built, I assumed I had a right to live here too, my mother-in-law said, clearly confused and looking down. A right to live here? Does that mean you were offering some sort of support to my sister? No, nothing like that. So, without bearing any burden or making any promises, you just assumed you had a right to live here just by offering your opinion on the layout? Yes, I'm sorry. It was my misunderstanding. At first, my brother looked at me suspiciously, but he refuted my mother-in-law's unreasonable claim with disgust. However, to my mother-in-law, it seemed more like anger than disgust, and she apologized deeply, becoming surprisingly docile. Just because our mother passed away doesn't mean there was ever a discussion about living with my sister-in-law's right, Tracy. Of course, I never discussed the details of this house with my mother-in-law. I only mentioned it was a house for living together with my mother. As I answered my brother's question, my mother-in-law suddenly covered her face with both hands. I had believed that my son Steve was the owner of this house. After caring for your mother, I thought it was my turn to live with you. But taking care of an unfamiliar elderly person is difficult, so I thought I would wait until your mother-in-law passed away. When I received the news of her death from my son, I thought it was my turn and terminated my apartment lease. Now I have nowhere to go. I didn't expect such a rash action without any promise either way. After my sister and her husband move out, this house is intended for us to live in. I'm sorry, but we have no intention of living with a stranger who's been disrespectful to us. Please leave. My mother-in-law might be pretending to be humble, but her words revealed contempt for our mother. My brother, too, avoided yelling directly at my mother-in-law, a figure related to me. However, his anger was gradually rising, and his voice became lower and colder. When my mother-in-law looked at us for help, we reiterated that she should leave. Actually, due to Steve's job, we will be moving abroad soon. Yeah, Mom. You know I work for a multinational company, and there's always been a possibility of overseas assignment, right? We've talked about this possibility before. We had decided to continue caring for my mother until we moved abroad, a decision discussed with my brother, and Steve supported it. Unfortunately, with my mother's passing, we will follow the original plan, and my brother and his wife will live here. Seeing the disappointment on my mother-in-law's face, Steve and I exchanged looks. Then, sighing, we continued, "If you've terminated your apartment and have nowhere to go, how about coming abroad with us?" We made the offer to move abroad, expecting her to refuse. You know I hate flying, right? I don't even have a passport. But if you have nowhere to live, you'll have to find somewhere new, Steve said, looking slightly worried. Still, applying for a passport now would take time, and preparing for an international move can't be done quickly. We're leaving soon, so it's probably impossible. My mother-in-law's previous energy had faded, and she appeared dejected. Seeing this, Steve made a suggestion. Should I talk to John? Wait, I can't go to John's place. Don't contact him, my mother-in-law quickly said. John is Steve's brother. My mother-in-law was eager to live in our house, but adamantly refused to live with Steve's brother, John. But if you have nowhere else to live, what choice do you have? What do you think? As Steve spoke, my mother-in-law, unable to argue, looked down, then suddenly looked up and said, "Then can you just give me money?" I absolutely refused to live with that daughter-in-law. Steve sighed in exasperation as he began to make a phone call. My mother-in-law shrieked, trying to snatch the phone away, but as soon as the call connected, she backed off. It seemed that John's wife had agreed to take my mother-in-law in. Afterward, we hurried to proceed with the funeral preparations and other necessary arrangements, leaving the rest to that side of the family. When my brother and I returned to the living room after finishing our conversation, my mother-in-law was silently sitting on a chair, apparently displeased with the idea of going to John's house. Now we can finally start preparing for the funeral. We still have a little time, so let's get the preparations going and wait, Steve suggested. Agreeing with his proposal, The three of us started listing what needed to be done. An hour passed, and when the doorbell rang, it was John's wife standing at the door. "Hi there." She had the appearance of a typical gal from a bygone era, dressed in eye-catching clothes and wearing a top with a deeply open neckline. That day, she was straightforward with her opinions, and despite her casual appearance, she disliked unfairness, being both direct and friendly. It seemed she would get along well with my brother. However, my mother-in-law harbored a dislike for her. "My condolences for your loss. I rushed over, so please excuse my attire," she said politely, which surprised me a bit. However, as soon as John's wife was led into the living room and saw my mother-in-law, she changed her demeanor and said, "Oh, come on, Grandma, cut it out already. Don't trouble Steve and Tracy anymore, let's go home." She helped my mother-in-law to stand up. Originally, we had discussed living together, so if you had just agreed to that proposal from the start, you might have been spending your days more peacefully by now. The pride of the elders can be quite formidable. Anyway, excuse us for taking her away. We've caused you enough trouble for today. With that declaration, she took my mother-in-law away, promptly apologizing deeply as they left. Actually, my brother and his wife had been proposing for a while that our mother lived with them. Despite her unconventional appearance, she's incredibly caring, and when they got married, she promised, "We'll look after her well." But our mother continuously chose to live alone and refused to live with her. Steve remarked, smiling bittersweetly, "She's really got a unique personality. There's goodness at her core, and my brother is also reliable, so it's likely that our mother will find stability in her new home with them." My mother-in-law moved in with John and his wife amicably, just as Steve had prophesied. She found it harder to act egotistically while John's wife was around, and these days she seemed to be having a reasonably calm existence. Maybe this relatively regimented setting is what she needs. Despite her constant whining, she never really seems to desire to live alone and never really attempts to accomplish anything on her own. With a resigned chuckle, Steve observed his mother's conduct and added, "She just likes to complain." As per our prearranged plan, John and his spouse currently reside in the house we constructed. Since John's wife's parents moved in lately and established a multi-generational living arrangement, it has developed into a cozy area that strengthens family ties. John and his wife's parents now share the mortgage, as was decided upon at the outset. Right now, my spouse Steve and I are in Paris, France, where he has a job assignment. There was first some fear of being strangers in a foreign nation. Luckily, my fluency in French turned out to be a benefit, as it made it easy for me to settle in and become part of the community. I have started teaching English in France, drawing on my background as a French teacher in the United States. In contrast to the United States, the work climate here offers guaranteed weekends off, along with fair working hours that accommodate personal time. Steve and I now spend a lot more time together, travel to different places every day, and live more laid-back lives. As a result, we are learning and experiencing life in a new country while living a purposeful life away from home.